People often notice it first in others: the quiet certainty, the self-importance, the absence of doubt. It shows up as confidence without reflection, conviction without curiosity, certainty that feels strangely immune to feedback. At a distance it feels harmless, sometimes impressive, sometimes irritating, rarely questioned beyond surface impressions. Yet moments appear when admiration turns uneasy, when certainty blocks awareness, when impact remains unseen. What looks like specialness often protects something fragile, something carefully hidden from conscious view. Zero self-awareness is commonly misunderstood as arrogance, narcissism, or deliberate ignorance. Yet psychology reveals it as a functional psychological shield rather than a personality defect. The label sounds accusatory, but beneath it lives a protective structure designed to preserve coherence when internal instability threatens emotional collapse. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that the ego inflates precisely where the self feels most endangered, creating an illusion of certainty to avoid inner fragmentation. What appears as specialness is often a compensatory posture, a way of standing taller over unexamined internal terrain. A brief scene unfolds in conversation. Someone speaks confidently about complex topics, dismissing nuance, correcting others without hesitation. The tone feels authoritative, yet strangely brittle, as if disagreement carries disproportionate emotional weight. Observers sense something rigid beneath the confidence, though language struggles to capture what feels off. Self-awareness requires the ability to observe one's own mental states, a skill that develops only when self-observation feels safe. When safety is absent, awareness becomes threatening, and the mind learns to avoid it entirely. Certainty replaces curiosity not because it is accurate, but because it is stabilizing. Another moment appears in a group setting. Laughter follows a bold claim, applause reinforces certainty, reflection remains unnecessary. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that behaviors rewarded by social reinforcement persist regardless of internal accuracy. When confidence earns admiration, the brain receives no signal to question itself. Zero self-awareness often coexists with high self-esteem on the surface, yet the esteem rests on fragile foundations. It depends on external validation rather than internal coherence. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that social dominance historically improved survival odds, even when accuracy suffered. Confidence signaled leadership, hesitation suggested vulnerability. The group followed certainty rather than insight. Modern observers inherit this bias, mistaking decisiveness for depth. A colleague dominates meetings, speaks over others, leaves little space for alternative views. The behavior feels controlling, yet internally it prevents exposure to uncertainty that feels intolerable. Self-awareness requires tolerating not knowing, ambiguity, contradiction, all of which destabilize a fragile identity structure. When identity depends on being exceptional, reflection becomes dangerous. Another snapshot appears at home. A disagreement arises, responsibility is deflected effortlessly, blame lands elsewhere without pause. The individual feels resolved, calm, untouched by doubt. To outsiders, this looks like emotional detachment or superiority. Internally, it prevents shame from surfacing. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described how meaning protects the psyche from collapse, yet false meaning can perform the same stabilizing function. Feeling special supplies meaning where self-examination might reveal emptiness or confusion. Zero self-awareness is not emptiness itself, but a defense against sensing it. The mind constructs a narrative of exceptionality to avoid confronting internal incoherence. A public interaction reveals this pattern clearly. Criticism emerges. The response arrives instantly, confident, dismissive, unyielding. No pause appears between stimulus and response. The speed signals automation, not deliberation. Awareness slows reaction, certainty accelerates it. In this sense, lack of self-awareness functions as an efficiency mechanism, conserving psychological energy. Reflection consumes resources, certainty conserves them. Social environments rarely penalize this economy. Instead, they often reward it with authority, attention, or compliance. Some people will recognize this immediately because they have encountered its impact repeatedly. What remains unseen is how early and deeply this protective certainty was learned. The origin of this pattern lives far earlier than adulthood, and its formation follows a predictable psychological logic. If you're still watching, you probably notice things most people miss. You question behavior. You look beneath the surface. If that sounds like you, subscribe. This channel was made for minds like yours. The origins of zero self-awareness often trace back to early experiences where emotional instability or unpredictability made reflection feel unsafe, unreliable, or even threatening. A child learns quickly which behaviors attract approval and which provoke withdrawal, rejection, or punishment, shaping automatic strategies for preserving psychological safety. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that certainty signals competence, while hesitation signals vulnerability, a pattern reinforced repeatedly during formative years in hierarchical social groups. A brief scene unfolds in childhood. A mistake provokes a caregiver's sudden anger. The child freezes, internalizes a need to appear composed at all costs. This is not moral failing, but an adaptive survival response encoded into cognitive and emotional routines. Attachment theory shows that inconsistent caregiving trains the mind to depend on external affirmation for internal stability, prioritizing projection over introspection. Another moment appears at school. A peer ridicules uncertainty. The child laughs confidently, masking self-doubt beneath a polished exterior. The response ensures social acceptance, teaching the nervous system that appearance of confidence is safer than revealing ambiguity. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described how individuals construct meaning to maintain inner stability, sometimes substituting illusion for insight when reality feels threatening. Early neurological loops form, associating certainty with relief and ambiguity with anxiety, creating reflexive patterns that bypass conscious evaluation. Behavioral science shows that repeated reinforcement ingrains these loops, making self-protective certainty automatic rather than optional. A teenager dominates classroom discussions, dismissing counterpoints, earning admiration, strengthening the internal narrative of exceptionality, and reducing engagement with self-doubt. These learned patterns become compressed over time, executed effortlessly when emotional stakes rise, functioning as shields against perceived threats. Another scene appears at home. Subtle criticism triggers defensive certainty. Arguments escalate quickly. Clarity remains elusive. The system prioritizes protection over accuracy. Evolutionary and developmental forces converge, rewarding decisiveness and masking vulnerability as a strategy for survival and social positioning. Certainty creates internal coherence, allowing the self to avoid confronting discomforting contradictions or gaps in competence. Even positive reinforcement from peers, teachers, or family reinforces the structure, teaching the mind that perceived exceptionalism ensures safety. When patterns persist into adulthood, they appear externally as confidence, arrogance, or perceived specialness, masking the fragile scaffolding beneath. A colleague dominates conversation with poise, but internally rehearses scripts to avoid exposure, relying on certainty to prevent destabilizing introspection. Early adaptation meets adult expectation, creating seamless behavior that appears natural while hiding its origins. The origin layer closes by revealing that what is seen as social dominance or self-assurance is deeply rooted in early psychological survival strategies, foreshadowing the complex social dynamics that follow. By adulthood, these early survival strategies no longer remain hidden. They manifest across relationships, workplaces, and family interactions as rigid certainty and selective attention. Most first notice the behavior in others: a friend who dismisses nuance, a partner who deflects responsibility, a colleague who dominates conversation effortlessly. A micro-story unfolds at a dinner. Someone recounts an event, their version unquestioned, corrections from others brushed aside with polite but firm dismissal. The confidence feels magnetic, yet observers sense subtle tension beneath composure, a discrepancy between perception and reality. In romantic relationships, disagreements escalate not because the issue itself is critical, but because perceived challenge threatens fragile internal coherence. One partner questions a minor decision, the other responds instantly with justification, layering certainty over doubt, leaving dialogue collapsed and unresolved. Family gatherings amplify these dynamics. history saturates exchanges, patterns of deference, blame, and avoidance re-emerge despite years of independence elsewhere. A sibling corrects a statement. Laughter follows. Tension lingers beneath surface harmony. Roles of authority and submission shift subtly, yet predictably. In workplaces, certainty masquerades as competence or leadership. Responses arrive before full information is processed, leaving observers impressed or cautious. A manager dismisses a team member's feedback, reframing critique as misunderstanding. Authority shields vulnerability, while peers adapt silently to preserve flow. Public settings reveal this pattern in amplified form. A stranger contradicts, irritation rises immediately. Control is reclaimed through volume, tone, or body language. Social reinforcement ensures repetition, applause, attention, and compliance reward displays of unwavering certainty, strengthening the underlying pattern. Microstory. A colleague presents a flawed idea. Others hesitate to challenge. Approval flows. The confident assertion remains unquestioned, reinforcing the sense of exceptionality. Modern social dynamics compound these expressions. Speed, visibility, and evaluation heighten the stakes for maintaining internal coherence externally. Emotional patterns learned for safety now navigate complex social networks, producing influence, but often at the cost of relational nuance and empathy. Digital interaction further accelerates this. Reactions occur instantly. Disagreement triggers defensive certainty amplified by virtual distance and attention metrics. Subtle withdrawal or deflection replaces self-reflection. Relationships adjust around repeated patterns. Peers adapt quietly to avoid triggering instability. A scene emerges. A friend monopolizes a discussion in a group chat. Challenges ignored. Silence accommodates. Relational equilibrium maintained at the expense of depth. Microstory. A partner refuses to acknowledge mistake during conversation, rationalizes, distracts. The household learns to maintain peace by deference rather than engagement. Behavioral science notes that such interactions train observers to recalibrate expectations, preserving functional stability while masking internal fragility. Even admiration and recognition reinforce the pattern externally, making specialness feel justified while awareness remains partial. Some viewers will recognize these dynamics immediately, sensing echoes in personal experience, moments of admiration tinged with subtle unease. The social expression of certainty is not random. It follows predictable rhythms shaped by early conditioning, social reinforcement, and survival logic. As modern life intensifies, these patterns interact with speed, exposure, and complexity, hinting at deeper amplification yet to be explored. Modern life provides conditions where zero self-awareness and inflated certainty not only survive, but thrive, amplified by technology, culture, and social reward structures that favor rapid expression. Digital platforms accelerate reactions, reducing the delay between stimulus and response, while ambiguous cues trigger automatic defensive certainty that previously served survival. A brief scene. A comment on social media sparks immediate outrage. Replies arrive before reflection. Certainty dominates. Nuance disappears. The mind rewarded with likes and attention. Notifications reinforce the behavior. Rapid emotional expression becomes currency. Calm analysis feels slow, invisible, or ineffective in comparison. Cultural narratives valorize authenticity and decisiveness, often conflating certainty with competence, reward appearing where reflection would normally act as a corrective. A colleague sends an email filled with absolute statements, corrections ignored, assertions accepted, internal doubt hidden beneath polished certainty reinforced externally. Evolutionary psychologists suggest humans evolved to follow confident signals, even when inaccurate, prioritizing cohesion over insight, a pattern now accelerated by visibility and speed. Microstory. A friend confidently asserts an opinion in a virtual meeting. Others hesitate to challenge. Applause follows. Social reinforcement strengthens unconscious certainty loops. Behavioral science notes that repeated reinforcement strengthens neurological loops, automating confidence responses and embedding them deeper into everyday interactions. A partner insists on interpretation of a past disagreement, reasoning inflexible, emotional energy spent defending certainty instead of exploring nuance. relational distance grows subtly. Technology also removes immediate feedback for error, allowing certainty to persist unchecked, while external acknowledgement signals success, regardless of accuracy or empathy. Public recognition rewards performance of exceptionality. Appearances validated through attention, authority, or visibility, independent of self-reflection or truth. Microstory. During a team presentation, a confident assertion dominates discussion. Colleagues adapt silently. The narrative reinforced. The original error remains invisible, self-awareness untouched. Economic and social pressures compound this, creating a landscape where appearing competent feels safer than admitting uncertainty. Survival incentives now psychological rather than physical. Even casual interactions become micro-exercises in maintaining perceived superiority. Defensive certainty becomes habitual. Identity scaffolding reinforced by repetition and reward. Awareness of internal inconsistency feels risky. Reflection slows action, and certainty ensures rapid adaptation in environments valuing speed over depth. Cultural amplification masks fragility, making the behavior appear intentional, exceptional, or deserved, while the underlying protective mechanism remains hidden. A family discussion escalates subtly. A sibling asserts interpretation with absolute certainty. Tension rises. Agreement follows to maintain harmony. Underlying insecurity unseen. Repeated exposure to amplified certainty normalizes it, teaching observers that dominance and self-assurance outweigh subtlety, nuance, or emotional honesty. Modern amplification transforms survival strategy into social advantage, yet carries hidden psychological cost, rigidity, relational friction, and diminished reflective capacity. Even when admired, the behavior narrows perception, compresses emotional experience, and quietly limits depth of understanding and connection. The pattern persists because society rewards the appearance of certainty, while its internal cost remains largely invisible. Recognition of this amplification invites a subtle unease, hinting that what is socially reinforced may not reflect internal stability. The next layer will explore how awareness confronts these patterns without offering escape, leaving the mind unsettled but illuminated. Awareness arrives quietly, not as mastery, but as discomfort, a subtle recognition that certainty often masks fragile, unexamined psychological scaffolding. The mind observes patterns previously unnoticed, noticing how effortlessly confidence replaces reflection, yet does not intervene, allowing behaviors to continue. Carl Jung noted that consciousness alone does not transform the psyche. It merely illuminates what has been operating in shadow. A microstory appears. During a family discussion, a confident assertion lands. Silence follows. Relational equilibrium is restored externally, while internal fragility remains invisible. Reflection does not dissolve the pattern. It highlights tension between perceived self and hidden processes, leaving an unsettled awareness that lingers beyond immediate experience. Another scene unfolds at work. A colleague dominates a meeting, corrections ignored, applause follows, observers sense imbalance, insight rises, yet nothing changes in the pattern itself. The discomfort of recognition coexists with fascination, curiosity, and subtle unease, revealing the hidden self without offering a path toward correction. Behavioral science notes that reflexive patterns, reinforced over decades, resist awareness alone, persisting even under scrutiny, appearing externally as confidence or exceptionalism. A brief, internal moment arrives, noticing defensive certainty in oneself, mirrored in another. Tension surfaces, understanding emerges, but solutions remain out of reach. Even admiration for others' composure carries subtle dissonance, a recognition of underlying protective mechanisms that have long gone unnoticed. Neurological loops that once safeguarded development continue operating automatically, guiding reactions in social, professional, and personal contexts alike. Reflection amplifies the gap between internal reality and external performance, awareness revealing fragility beneath apparent strength, without resolving it. A partner disputes a minor point. Instant certainty arises, response automatic, relational ripple extends. The cycle repeats unaltered, insight caught in observation rather than intervention. This layer exposes the cost of certainty, rigidity, relational tension, subtle estrangement from nuance, and emotional depth, experienced without remedy. The hidden self does not vanish when seen. It persists, recalibrating, adapting, operating under observation, quietly asserting influence over thought and interaction. Insight arrives as illumination, not closure, showing patterns woven into identity, societal structures, and survival logic that remain inescapable. Awareness intensifies perception, making repetition of these behaviors almost impossible to overlook, yet offers no immediate relief, no neat resolution. Even reflection cannot retract decades of learned adaptation, leaving certainty intact while consciousness expands, an unresolved tension between recognition and influence. The mind perceives the protective function beneath apparent arrogance, seeing it operate in oneself and others, yet the instinct persists, quietly unyielding. Psychological insight reveals patterns without correcting them, exposing both mechanism and consequence, leaving a space for thought without closure. Moments of recognition linger in quiet interactions, micro-behaviors, and subtle dominance, felt but rarely addressed, reinforcing the unresolved nature of self-awareness. This illumination produces a calm unease, a lingering observation of human behavior operating continuously beyond conscious control. In the final reflection, the viewer is left with recognition of certainty's dual nature, protective yet constraining, visible yet incompletely understood, alive within every interaction. The hidden self continues to act, unchallenged by awareness alone, quietly shaping perception, reaction, and relationship in ways difficult to disentangle.